So, have you heard that the Russians are actually getting richer while Americans are getting poorer? That is supposedly what a global wealth report says. So, the global wealth pyramid, the top 1% of the whole world. What's going on, guys? Always good to see you. Supposedly, Russia got richer despite the war in Ukraine, while the West has lost trillions and trillions of dollars in terms of wealth. How could this even be real? So I bumped into this on Business Insider, but it's actually a global wealth report that comes out annually from the big Swiss bank called UBS. They do an annual global wealth report, and it's quite interesting. So it's got some nice pyramid graphics talking about the top 1% net worth. But of course, the most shocking thing, and it is just insane, it's so hard to believe that the Russians are getting richer. Makes no sense. Sanction after sanction after sanction. Oh my God, confiscations. Okay, back to the UBS report on global wealth. According to them, Russia added roughly 56,000 new millionaires to the whole country, to the economy. 56,000 new millionaires. That's a lot of new millionaires. And you compare that to here, United States, the US, guess what? The US has lost 1 million millionaires. Pretty nuts. And apparently people worth over $50 million, top 1% of the world, basically. That number increased in Russia as well. Over 4,000 new 50 million plus wealthy individuals. Okay, so now let's look at the crazy long report. What I find interesting is some of these pyramids. They're insane. The amount of people that basically sit at the top of the pyramid is pretty fascinating. So, the global wealth pyramid, the top 1% of the whole world, where they're measured as having a net worth of over 1 million US dollars. These people are sitting at holding global wealth that sits at 45.8%. So the top 1% of the world owns nearly 46% of the global wealth. Pretty shocking and pretty amazing too. So according to UBS Bank, this is estimated at roughly 59 million people who own 46% of the world's wealth. Roughly 60 million people are sitting around with $208 trillion dollars. That is a massive amount of concentrated wealth. Top 1%. Later on, I'll show a little breakdown by countries, but this is the global wealth pyramid. Okay, so that's the top 1%. Okay, so the next batch of people between $100,000 and $1 million in terms of wealth, that's roughly 12% of the world. And in their estimates, they still hold quite a bit of wealth. That is a nice chunk of change. So 12% of humanity, roughly 642 million people, have collectively almost $179 trillion. That is distributed amongst a lot of people though. But still, that's nearly 40% of the world's wealth concentrated in 12% of the world's population. Pretty interesting. Okay, so the next crowd sits between 10,000 and 100,000 of personal wealth. And that is roughly 34% of the global population, 1.8 billion people. It's a lot. They hold roughly $62 trillion collectively, coming out with 13.6% of global wealth. Now, sitting at the bottom of the pyramid is most of the world. Over 50% of the population, 52.5% of the world sits here, with their wealth is estimated at below 10,000 US dollars. With the bottom 52% of the world, their collective wealth is only 1%. Well, 1.2% of the global wealth, sitting at $5.3 trillion. So the majority of the world, over 52%, has just 1% of global wealth. Pretty interesting. Okay, so now I'm looking at the top 1% of the world, the creme de la creme, top of the wealth pyramid. It is pretty interesting. So according to the estimates, there are over 51.5 million people, and they sit between 1 million and 5 million in terms of wealth. So that's the majority of the top 1% of the world, climbing higher between 5 million and $10 million. There's roughly 5.08 million people. Really not that many, not as many as I would think. Remember, this is the top 1% of the world. So between 10 million and 50 million in terms of personal wealth, There's roughly 2.5 million people all over the world that have between 10 and $50 million. Now, the true top 1% of the 1%, the creme de la creme, with a net worth of over $50 million, there's only 243,000 people who are worth this much. And that is where the majority of the world's wealth is. Trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars. Pretty interesting. So here they have a change in household wealth. This is all broken down by regions, a few winners, and also broken down by dollars in billions. A few regions are coming out ahead. Look at Africa has seen improvement in wealth. India, Latin America, a big winner. And the big shocker here is that Russia has come out as a winner. Absolute insanity. They say Russia, Mexico, India, and Brazil, BRICS countries, well, minus Mexico. And the big losers coming out with North America and, of course, Europe. But despite the West coming out as the biggest losers, according to this map, the West basically has the most wealth. Not that surprising, living very well. But of course, we must remember that they count the ultra high net worth individuals like Elon or Bill Gates and so on. These people have a lot of money. So these numbers aren't really representative of an average person. BRICS countries have had the largest wealth increases. Now Mexico, the outlier there, of course, is heavily connected to the United States. And a lot of their economy is basically directly coming out of the US. Now a lot of American cars, even Japanese cars, they're all made in Mexico. They're getting shipped here. So a big part of their economy is essentially a proxy of the US economy. So if it wasn't for the US basically getting all the stuff made there, I don't think they would be gaining as much. And that gets to their next point. They talk about reduction in wealth inequalities, which is a pretty interesting point they make, because they say that along with reduction in wealth, specifically for the West, of course, right? And because of that, they say that overall wealth inequality has fallen, meaning that the disparity, the difference in wealth globally has actually gone down. That probably has a lot to do with China, India, parts of Latin America. They're raising their wealth while the US and Europe, well, it's going down. In their highlights, they even put the number of US millionaires globally fell 3.5 million. 3.5 million people who used to be millionaires. Boom, that number went down last year. But not all news is bad, according to their projections, which I don't see where the hell they're getting these numbers. But according to their projections, they say that global wealth, using their metrics, will actually rise by 38%. That is quite a bit, nearly 40%. And they say that it's mostly the middle class, which is a bit of a shocker, actually. So they have this media release PDF. It's kind of a short summary. Let's go over their summary. So in their global wealth estimates, the US alone lost $5.9 trillion in terms of wealth. And apparently they combined this with Europe and they came up with a number of $10.9 trillion. It's a lot of money. They say that heading the list of losses are some of the world's biggest economies: US, China, Japan, Australia, Canada. The president at Global Wealth Management at UBS, he said that as the world's largest truly global wealth management, that they're uniquely positioned to draw on their knowledge and insights across the world of, well, wealth management. So according to him, according to UBS president, he says that the sweeping analysis of household wealth covers, get this, an estimated wealth holdings of 5.4 billion adults all across the world. Pretty nifty analysis. Okay, so that's what he says. Now, one of the economists and report authors, he says much of the decline median aggregate in wealth is sitting in 2022 was driven for the US. That just doesn't work. You guessed it. Because the average worker in the US inflation is paid. But this guy says that the appreciation of the US currency against other currencies, there's no way that the average drove some of the decline in wealth, which I find kind of interesting. But if you think about it, it makes sense, because everything is relative. So if everything is relative, one currency here against the US currency, even though for us, we see it as high inflation, the value of the dollar is going down because things cost more, it only makes sense that the value is going down. But relative to other currencies, who's also losing value, relative to that, the US is doing better, which means as the global currency, you can buy more with the US dollar, you can go snatch up whatever they're selling. Therefore, the US dollar is still appreciating relative to other currencies. Hope that makes sense. So despite inflation being sky high, the US dollar still retains its power across the world. Even though BRICS countries are, well, they are fighting that. De-dollarization. Now, the same economist goes on to say, Anthony Shorrocks, he goes on to say that this is still the slowest wealth increase since 2008, since the whole housing crash. Now, in the same press release, one of their chief investment officers made the prediction that the world will basically see an increase of nearly 40% in terms of wealth by the year 2027, which seems like an extremely optimistic prediction to me. They say that the wealth per adult will increase of roughly 30% per adult. Per adult, an increase of 30%. What's interesting is that with inflation, with the dollar being worth less, it will take more money for people to buy things, which means that with all the money printing going on, that more people will hold more money. So it only makes sense that per adult, wealth would increase to a certain percentage, because of course they need more money to buy the things that they used to buy for less money. The UBS report highlights that the main feature of the two middle pyramid segments is the dominance of China, which I find very, very interesting. So according to their estimates, this accounts for 36% of total membership, 36% of the world. And now all those jobs went to China, all the manufacturing went to China. So in a sense, that global wealth was transferred in terms of jobs to China, and that brought up their economy. Interesting to think about. And of course, that's because, it's a lot cheaper to pay them to do something than it is to pay someone in the West. Okay, so sticking with China and them absorbing some of those jobs that went overseas, basically China has achieved the biggest and fastest wealth growth ever in the last 20 years. So 20 years ago, back then, roughly in the year 2000, the median wealth in China was sitting at $3,100. So in 20 years, that jumped passing $30,000 per adult. That is a big, big increase in wealth. Where did that come from? Well, it came from all those jobs that went to China, got outsourced. And then the Chinese rose up and increased their wealth. Just makes sense. This chart tells us that the ultra high net worth individuals, the majority of them are here in the United States, by far beating out any other country, with China shockingly at number 2, considering how much business is there, how much they're feeding the West with their products. It makes sense. Germany coming in at number 3. India is a bit of a shocker with number 4. Granted, their population is so darn big. Canada, and then Russia. But remember that Russia gained 56,000 millionaires according to their estimates. What's interesting is that Russia is actually a kind of a low population country. It's the largest surface area in the world, the largest country, but they only have like 145 million people there. So not that many people. So roughly half the US population. Says that the surge in global inflation is expected to persist for much longer than anticipated. What does that say? That says that there's going to be more money printing and things are going to cost more. But because there is more money printing, that means that people will be able to hold more money. They'll have to, because things cost more. And here they put it into numbers. They say that over the next 5 years, household wealth will increase by $174 trillion, equaling roughly $25.5 thousand per adult. But that's kind of a deceptive number, because with inflation, like I said, more money printing means people will have more money in their pockets. They say that with the current projections of the inflation rate, the real global wealth will only increase roughly 2% because of the money printing, because of inflation. So they say that global wealth will average 2%, but per adult, it will be less than 1 ouch. All thanks to inflation. And some people still argue with me that inflation is not real. It just blows my mind. Makes no sense to me. And of course, what makes this more interesting is this is coming right at a time when the BRICS countries are holding a giant summit in South Africa. So you couple this with the BRICS countries basically battling the dollar in terms of currency, the reserve global currency. On top of the currency topic, India also scored the giant big win in terms of lunar exploration. But I gotta say, that video looks mighty wonky. Almost looks a little... But to put it a little bit into context, those graphics are actually a CGI representation of supposedly what is actually happening. So it's not a real live feed. That's why it looks like one of those Atari games from the 80s. Now, going back to BRICS Summit in South Africa, Putin, during one of his video conferences, I'm guessing he didn't want to show up in case, arrested or something. Anyways, the whole de-dollarization, he claims, and others at BRICS, that it's gaining momentum. And of course, the idea of de-dollarization is that the BRICS countries rely on the dollar less, rely less on the global reserve currency. With BRICS, you got China, Russia, Brazil, South Africa, and India. These guys put together, they have 26% of global GDP. 26%, it's quite a bit. And 31% of global economy. So there's a lot of money flowing in there. And if they stop using the dollar, that could drive inflation up a little more, devalue the dollar a little more, hurt us here in the West a lot more. That's why de-dollarizing is not good for us. On the plus side, the majority of the world's business is still conducted using the dollar, and of course the petrodollar, which is a big deal. So hopefully, before de-dollarizing gets totally out of control, hopefully our dear leaders come up with a brilliant idea to save the dollar. And despite everything, despite all the craziness, I don't think anyone wants to ruin the dollar, kill the dollar. Maybe I'm just being optimistic. Hopefully. But anyways, all right guys, this video is getting way too long. Thanks for watching. Thanks for sticking around if you watched the whole thing. Always a pleasure to see you. All right guys, well that's it for this one. Thanks for watching. Smash the like. Please do subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.